Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about some shortcomings of GDP and wrap up this chapter with our conclusion. Now, while GDP is a great measure of our economic success, there are some important shortcomings of using GDP that might underestimate or cause bias when we calculate it. It's important to keep these shortcomings in mind whenever we talk about a nation's well-being. We have to think about non-market goods, the underground economy, the quality of the environment, and leisure. Non-market goods are goods and services produced but not sold. These are uncompensated household activities like washing dishes, mowing lawns, cleaning, and other items that we can't necessarily measure because they're not sold on the open market. These can lead to understating economic activity. GDP is unable to distinguish how exactly goods are made because non-market goods do still create value for society, but they're not necessarily compensated. Therefore, in less developed societies where houses produce many of their own goods, GDP might not be the best measure of economic output. If transactions are not directly measurable because the income is not reported, they're not included in official measures of GDP. The underground or shadow economy can be divided into two subcategories, and these are legal and illegal activities. All legal underground activity is technically illicit, as tax evasion is a crime. But the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has estimated that for developed countries, the underground economy is about 15% of GDP, and in transitioning economies, that percentage rises to between 21 and 30% of GDP. In developing countries, the underground economy can be as much as 45% of GDP. The US is widely believed to have one of the smallest shadow economies in the world at approximately 10% of GDP. In most cases, United States citizens can earn more by legitimately participating in the economy than by engaging in illegal activity. A strong economy that creates jobs and opportunities for advancement helps reduce the size of the underground economy. Corruption is also less common in the US and developed economies, so participants are relatively free to transact with one another without worrying about bribing authorities or organized crime, and this is often not the case in many developing countries. Environmental quality is not something that's included in GDP. However, low environmental standards can lead to health issues and other undesirable features. Generally, we assume that people assign a positive value to beautiful scenery, clean air, and clean water, but these are not things that we can count on in GDP. In fact, it's often the case that countries with greater GDP have more pollution, and in this way, GDP may not be an accurate representation of well-being. Leisure time is something very important to consider as well. There's a trade-off between labor and leisure, and GDP only measures labor. If we look at this slide and compare a couple of different countries, we see that in South Korea, the average work week is 46 hours. In the Netherlands, it's 28 hours. The US and Japan are both 36. Now, if two countries have equal GDP, but one has an average work week that's 10 hours longer, are both places equally desirable to live in? And the answer here is that maybe not. We may be able to accurately compare the US and Japan because they have the same work week length, but it's a misleading comparison to compare the US and the Netherlands without adjusting for the difference in the number of hours worked. On this slide, we have a practice what you know that asks, which of the following would not be included in GDP? The correct answer here is Michael paying a neighbor kid to mow his yard, because this would not be given or taxed and reported to the US government. Because of that, this cash transaction is not reportable in GDP and would not be included. Another thing that GDP doesn't necessarily measure is happiness, but despite its shortcomings, GDP is still a pretty effective tool to measure overall life satisfaction. Stevenson and Wolfers find evidence that wealthier individuals report greater life satisfaction than poorer people in the same country, and that overall, wealthier nations report greater life satisfaction than poorer ones. This graph is 6.12, and it shows how as GDP per capita increases as we move to the right, the satisfaction per country increases as well. In this chapter, we talked all about how a measure of economic output is gross domestic product. We talked about how this is the market value of all final goods and services that are produced in a nation within a specific period of time. And we also use this to examine economic growth, fluctuations in economic activity, and cross-country comparisons. If you have any questions from this chapter, please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I'll talk with you in the next one. Thank you.